The sun beat down mercilessly on the adobe buildings of Santa Fe as Miguel Torres wiped sweat from his brow. July 1895 was proving to be particularly unforgiving. The territorial capital of New Mexico had changed since the railroad's arrival 15 years prior, bringing an influx of Anglo settlers and businessmen, but Miguel's neighborhood still maintained its Spanish colonial character. A letter had arrived that morning from his cousin Elena in Albuquerque. Her handwriting, usually neat and controlled, appeared hastened and uneven. Miguel read it for the third time as he sat in the shade of his small front porch. "I implore you to come, Miguel. Something is terribly wrong with the Herrera family. 3 infant boys dead within 2 years, each following their baptism night. The town whispers, but no one speaks openly. Father Dominguez seems troubled beyond mere spiritual concern. The doctor claims natural causes, crib death he calls it, but I've seen the mother's eyes. They hold something beyond grief. There is fear there, Miguel. Deep, knowing fear." Miguel folded the letter carefully. As a journalist for the Santa Fe New Mexican, he had developed a reputation for investigating stories others avoided. Elena knew this, which explained why she had reached out to him rather than the local authorities. He glanced at the small box of possessions on his table, a notebook, pencils, a small camera he had recently purchased, and a revolver. The weapon was a precaution he rarely needed, but the isolation of rural New Mexico territories sometimes demanded such measures. His editor had been pressuring him for a compelling story. The paper's readership had been declining, losing ground to the English-language publications that catered to the growing Anglo population. A mysterious series of infant deaths might not be the uplifting tale his editor hoped for, but it could be the kind of human interest story that transcended cultural divides. Miguel packed his belongings methodically. The journey to Albuquerque wasn't particularly long by train, but the small village where Elena lived was a half-day's ride beyond. He would need to hire a horse in Albuquerque. As he prepared to leave, his elderly neighbor, Senora Vasquez, appeared at his gate. "You're leaving again, Miguel?" she asked, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Just for a week or two, Senora. Family matters in Los Ojos." Her expression darkened. "Los Ojos? Be careful there, that place has old shadows." Miguel paused. "What do you mean?" "My grandmother spoke of it. A place where the land remembers, where old Spanish blood mixed with things that should have been left alone." She made the sign of the cross. "Just be careful what questions you ask after sunset." Miguel smiled politely, accustomed to the superstitions of the older generation, yet something in her earnest warning settled uncomfortably in his stomach. "I'll return before you notice I'm gone," he assured her, locking his door. As the train pulled away from Santa Fe that afternoon, Miguel watched the landscape transform from the dusty outskirts of the capital to the wide-open desert. The rhythmic clicking of the rails usually lulled him into contemplation, but today his mind remained fixed on Elena's letter and the curious deaths of the Herrera boys. 3 baptisms, 3 deaths, all on the same night as their introduction to the faith. It could be coincidence, of course. Infant mortality remained distressingly common throughout the territory. Yet the pattern suggested something more deliberate, or perhaps something more ancient. The sun was setting as the train approached Albuquerque, painting the Sandia Mountains in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Miguel gathered his belongings, steeling himself for whatever awaited him in Los Ojos. He had come seeking a story. He could not have known he was about to uncover a legacy of terror that had haunted the Herrera family for generations. Los Ojos emerged from the landscape like an afterthought, a small cluster of adobe buildings surrounding a modest church, with scattered homesteads marking the outlying areas. Miguel arrived as evening approached, the dust from his rented horse's hooves catching the golden light of sunset. Elena met him at the edge of town, her slender frame draped in a simple dark dress. Though only 25, the harsh territorial life had begun etching fine lines around her eyes. She embraced him tightly. "Gracias a Dios you've come," she whispered. "I feared you might dismiss my concerns." "I would never," Miguel replied, dismounting. "Tell me everything you know about these deaths." They walked toward Elena's small home on the outskirts of the village, leading the horse behind them. "The Herreras are one of the oldest families here, descendants of the original Spanish settlers. Carlos Herrera married Isabella Montoya 4 years ago. Their first son, Antonio, was born healthy, baptized at dusk as is tradition here, then found dead in his crib the next morning." Miguel nodded, making mental notes. "And the same happened with their second child?" "Yes, Manuel, and then Rodrigo just last month. All healthy boys, all dead after baptism night." Elena lowered her voice. "Isabella has not spoken since the last death. She sits by the window of their home, watching the church. What does Carlos say? He blames God, then the doctor, then himself. He's taken to drinking heavily." Elena paused before her door. "The townspeople avoid them now. Some say it's a curse." "And what do you think?" Miguel asked, studying his cousin's face. "I think someone should look at the baptismal font in the church," she said carefully. "I clean for Father Dominguez sometimes. The day after each baptism, I've found him scrubbing it vigorously, though it appeared clean to my eyes." Inside Elena's modest home, Miguel unpacked while she prepared a simple dinner of beans, tortillas, and coffee. As they ate, Miguel pressed for more details. "Who attends these baptisms?" "Family members, godparents, Father Dominguez. The last one also had Dr. Winters present. He's the new American doctor who came last year." "Any unusual visitors to town around these times?" Elena thought for a moment. "There was a man, tall, well-dressed, not from around here. He arrived before Rodrigo's baptism and left the next day. I don't know his name, but he spent time with Carlos." Miguel's journalistic instincts stirred. "And where can I find Dr. Winters?" "He has a small office near the general store. But Miguel," Elena leaned forward, "be careful how you approach this. Los Ojos keeps its secrets. Outsiders asking questions are not always welcome, even if you are of Spanish blood." After dinner, Miguel stepped outside to smoke a cigarette and survey the town in the gathering darkness. The church's silhouette stood prominently against the night sky. A single light burned in its window. Father Dominguez, perhaps, attending to late devotions. In another direction, set slightly apart from other homes, a larger adobe house stood dark, except for a single candle illuminating an upstairs window. A woman's silhouette was visible, motionless. "Isabella Herrera," Elena confirmed, joining him outside. "She keeps vigil every night." "Tomorrow I'll speak with the doctor and the priest," Miguel decided. "Then Carlos Herrera himself." "And tonight?" Elena asked. Miguel's gaze remained fixed on the distant silhouette of the grieving mother. "Tonight, I need to see the cemetery, where the boys are buried." Elena crossed herself, but nodded, retrieving a lantern from inside. As they walked through the quiet village toward the small cemetery behind the church, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Not just by the villagers curious about a stranger, but by something more persistent. The weight of generations seemed to press upon Los Ojos, as if the very land remembered things the people had tried to forget. The small cemetery behind the church lay silent under the silver light of a waxing moon. Wooden crosses and modest stone markers stretched in uneven rows, marking generations of Los Ojos residents. Elena's lantern cast elongated shadows as they moved between the graves. "There," she said softly, indicating a corner section near an old cottonwood tree. "The Herrera boys." 3 small graves lay side by side, each with a simple wooden cross bearing a name and date. Fresh flowers adorned Rodrigo's grave, wilting in the summer heat. The older graves of Antonio and Manuel featured small, weathered wooden toys, a horse for one, a soldier for the other. Miguel knelt to examine the dates. 8 months between Antonio and Manuel, then 15 months until Rodrigo. Isabella was pregnant again quickly after each loss, Elena explained. The village midwife says it was as if she was desperate to replace what was taken. Miguel removed his camera from his bag. "May I?" Elena nodded, holding the lantern higher to provide better light. The camera's flash powder momentarily illuminated the entire cemetery in harsh white light. As the flash faded, Miguel thought he saw movement near the church wall, a shadow detaching itself, then disappearing around the corner. He stiffened. "Someone's watching us." Elena clutched his arm. "We should go. We shouldn't be here after dark." "No, wait." Miguel approached the three graves more closely, running his fingers over the soil of Rodrigo's burial. The earth was still relatively loose. "Elena, were autopsies performed?" Dr. Winters examined the bodies, but no formal autopsy. He claimed they died from natural causes. Their hearts simply stopped. Miguel frowned. 3 healthy boys, all dying the same way on the same night of their lives? That's not natural. A sudden breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood, sending a shower of shadows dancing across the graves. Elena's lantern flickered. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something I didn't write in my letter because it seemed impossible." Miguel turned to her. "Tell me." The day after each death, when the women prepared the bodies for burial, they found the same mark on each boy, a small, perfect circle behind the left ear, like a birthmark. But none of the boys had such a mark at birth. Miguel's journalistic skepticism battled with a growing unease. A circular mark could have many explanations. Perhaps. But Isabella once told me, before she stopped speaking entirely, that she dreamed of a tall man in black standing over her children's cribs on each death night. She said she couldn't move or scream, only watch. "Sleep paralysis," Miguel suggested, "common in times of stress." Then why did Carlos later say he saw the same figure on the night Rodrigo died? He was fully awake, returning from the cantina. Miguel had no immediate answer. He photographed each grave individually, then stepped back to capture all 3 together. As they turned to leave, Miguel's eye caught something unusual about the positioning of the graves relative to the church. The 3 small plots seemed deliberately placed to form a line pointing directly at the baptismal entrance of the church. "Is this arrangement traditional?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. "The cemetery has no particular organization. Families are usually grouped together, but—" She studied the alignment with newfound concern. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. A tall figure in clerical garb emerged from the darkness. "Father Dominguez," Elena said, her voice reflecting relief and apprehension in equal measure. The priest was younger than Miguel expected, perhaps 40, with a lined face suggesting burdens beyond his years. His eyes, dark and penetrating, fixed on Miguel with immediate suspicion. "Visitors to our cemetery at night?" His voice carried the formal Spanish of someone educated in Madrid rather than the local dialect. "My cousin, Miguel Torres," Elena explained. "He's come from Santa Fe to visit." "A social visit that begins in a graveyard is unusual, Senor Torres." The priest's tone remained neutral, but his gaze flicked to the camera in Miguel's hands. "Forgive me, Father. I'm a journalist by profession. The habit of documentation is difficult to break." Miguel offered his hand, which the priest briefly took. "A journalist?" Father Dominguez's expression tightened. "And what stories do you seek in Los Ojos?" "We are a simple village with simple concerns." Before Miguel could respond, Elena interjected. "It's late, and Miguel has had a long journey. We should return home." The priest nodded slowly. "Indeed, the cemetery is not a place for nighttime wanderings. The dead deserve their peace." As they walked past him, Father Dominguez added, "If you seek to understand our village, Senor Torres, perhaps begin with prayers rather than investigations. Join us for Mass tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Father. I'll consider it." Boy! As they walked back through the village, Miguel noticed the priest remained in the cemetery, a solitary figure among the graves. When they reached a bend in the road, Miguel glanced back and saw Father Dominguez kneeling before the Herrera boys' graves, his head bowed. "He seems troubled by these deaths," Miguel observed. "The whole village is troubled," Elena replied. "But no one speaks of it directly. It's as if naming the fear would give it power." Back at Elena's home, Miguel reviewed his notes by lamplight while his cousin prepared for bed. 3 deaths, all following baptism, all with the same mysterious mark. A priest who scrubbed the baptismal font, parents who saw a mysterious figure, and beneath it all, the whispers of a curse that no one would name. Tomorrow, he would speak with Dr. Winters and Carlos Herrera. But tonight, despite his rational mind, Miguel found himself wondering about the tall shadow that had moved near the church wall, and whether it would visit his dreams. Morning in Los Ojos arrived with blinding sunlight and the distant tolling of the church bell calling the faithful to Mass. Miguel had slept poorly, his dreams filled with indistinct shadows and the crying of infants. He declined Elena's invitation to attend church services, preferring to use the time to seek out Dr. Winters. The doctor's office occupied half of a small adobe building shared with the telegraph office. A painted wooden sign reading Edward Winters, M.D., hung slightly askew above the door. Miguel knocked and waited. The man who answered was younger than Miguel had expected, perhaps 35, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his hands bore the slight staining of iodine. "Can I help you?" The doctor's accent marked him as Eastern, perhaps Boston or New York. "Miguel Torres, from the Santa Fe, New Mexican," Miguel introduced himself, offering his hand. "I was hoping to speak with you about some recent deaths in the village." Dr. Winters hesitated before shaking Miguel's hand, then stepped back to allow him entry. "The Herrera children, I presume. News travels fast in the territory." The office was surprisingly well appointed for such a remote location. Modern medical instruments gleamed in a glass cabinet, and bookshelves lined with medical texts suggested a man dedicated to his profession. "Please sit." Dr. Winters gestured to a chair while settling behind his desk. "Though I'm not sure what a newspaper could find interesting about tragic but natural deaths. Udrad, 3 infants from the same family, all dying on the night of their baptism. You don't find that worthy of investigation?" Miguel asked, studying the doctor's reaction. Winters removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Torres, I understand how patterns can suggest meaning where none exists. I've examined each of those poor children. All exhibited signs consistent with what we now call sudden infant death syndrome, all with identical marks behind their left ears." The doctor's expression flickered with surprise before settling into careful neutrality. "You've been speaking with the local women. Folk superstition often attaches significance to natural post-mortem changes." "Was it post-mortem lividity then?" Miguel pressed. "Something similar." Winters replaced his spectacles. "Look, I came to this territory to bring modern medicine to communities that need it. The people here blend Catholic doctrine with old Spanish superstitions and native beliefs. When tragedy strikes, they look for meaning, for blame. And you found nothing suspicious in any of the deaths?" The doctor stood and walked to his bookshelf, selecting a thick medical volume. "Mr. Torres, are you familiar with current medical literature on infant mortality?" "I'm familiar with coincidence and its limits," Miguel replied. "What about the timing? All after baptism?" "Baptisms here are conducted at dusk, followed by family celebrations that often last into the night. The infants are overstimulated, their routines disrupted." Winters flipped through the book, then turned it toward Miguel, displaying a page of medical illustrations. "The developing infant brain is delicate. Disruptions can have consequences." Miguel skimmed the technical text, unconvinced. "Did you know Father Dominguez thoroughly cleans the baptismal font after each Herrera baptism?" Something hardened in the doctor's eyes. "The good father and I have different approaches to community care. He offers comfort through ritual. I seek answers through science." "And have you found answers for Isabella Herrera? I understand she stopped speaking since her last child died." Mrs. Herrera suffers from profound melancholia, understandable given her losses. Winters closed the book with finality. I've recommended she seek treatment at the sanitarium in Santa Fe, but her husband refuses. Miguel sensed the doctor was withholding something. Have you treated many children in Los Ojos? Dozens. The Herrera cases are anomalous. Any other families with multiple infant deaths? A subtle tension appeared in Winter's jaw. Not currently. There was a case before my arrival. The Ortiz family lost 2 children several years ago, but infant mortality remains tragically common in these territories. Miguel made notes, then changed direction. I understand a stranger visited around the time of the last baptism, a well-dressed man who met with Carlos Herrera. The doctor's pen, which he had been fidgeting with, suddenly stilled. I wouldn't know about visitors to the village. I focus on my patients. But surely in a place this small, Mr. Torres, Winters interrupted, standing to signal the end of their conversation. I've cooperated with your questions out of professional courtesy, but I have patients to see. Unless you're here for medical treatment, I must ask you to leave. Miguel rose, tucking his notebook away. One last question, Doctor. Do you attend all baptisms in Los Ojos, or only the Herrera ceremonies? The doctor's face remained impassive, but Miguel noticed a slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his spectacles. I attend when invited, as a courtesy to the families under my care. He opened the door. Good day, Mr. Torres. Outside, Miguel paused to organize his thoughts. The doctor's defensiveness suggested either professional pride or something more concerning. His explanation for the deaths seemed plausible on the surface, yet failed to account for the strange marks or the precise pattern of timing. The church service was ending, parishioners streaming into the sunlight. Miguel spotted Eleanor among them and was about to approach when he noticed Father Dominguez engaged in intense conversation with a heavy-set man whose slumped shoulders and reddened face suggested habitual drinking. Carlos Herrera, Eleanor confirmed, joining him. He rarely attends Mass since Rodrigo died, but Father Dominguez summoned him this morning. Miguel observed the interaction, the priest speaking earnestly, Carlos responding with short, angry gestures. Finally, Carlos shoved past the priest and stalked away toward the village cantina. I think it's time I introduced myself to Mr. Herrera, Miguel decided, watching the grieving father's retreat. Elena caught his arm. Not now. When he's been drinking, he's unpredictable. Wait until afternoon, when Isabella's brother will be with him. Miguel nodded reluctantly, his gaze drawn back to the church where Father Dominguez stood watching them, his expression unreadable across the distance. Then perhaps another visit to the cemetery is in order, Miguel suggested. In daylight there may be details we missed. What neither of them noticed was Dr. Winters observing their exchange from his office window, his hand reaching for the telegraph key as they walked away. The afternoon heat had driven most villagers indoors for siesta when Miguel and Elena returned to the church. The heavy wooden doors stood partially open, offering refuge from the relentless sun. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately, the thick adobe walls creating a cool sanctuary. The Church of Los Ojos was modest compared to the grand cathedral in Santa Fe, but it carried the weight of centuries. Original Spanish colonial elements blended with later additions and repairs, creating a patchwork of history in wood and stone. Faded paintings of saints gazed down from the walls, their expressions serene despite the flaking paint. Father Dominguez is usually resting now, Elena whispered, her voice still carrying in the empty nave. The baptismal records would be in his office behind the sacristy. Miguel hesitated. I didn't come intending to snoop through church records without permission. Is it snooping to look at public documents of birth and death? Besides, Eleanor added with surprising firmness, 3 boys are dead. Propriety seems a small concern. They moved quietly past the altar to a narrow wooden door that led to the sacristy. The room beyond held vestments and ceremonial items, all meticulously organized. A smaller door led to what appeared to be Father Dominguez's office, a simple desk, bookshelves, and a narrow cot, suggesting the priest sometimes slept here rather than in the attached rectory. There, Elena pointed to a row of leather-bound volumes on a lower shelf. The parish records. Miguel carefully removed the most recent volume, its leather cover worn at the edges from handling. Inside, neat handwriting documented the sacraments performed in Los Ojos: baptisms, marriages, last rites, and burials. He turned to the entries for the Herrera boys. Each baptismal record appeared normal, with godparents named and dates recorded. He noted that while the godmothers varied, the same godfather was listed for all three boys, Gabriel Montoya, Isabella's brother. "The baptismal font," Miguel said suddenly. "Where is it?" Elena led him back to the main church area, indicating a stone basin near the entrance. The font was ancient, carved from a single piece of sandstone, its surface worn smooth by generations of use. Miguel examined it carefully, noting nothing unusual except its immaculate condition compared to other church fixtures. "You said Father Dominguez cleans this thoroughly after the Herrera baptisms?" Elena nodded. "With salt and blessed water, then fresh herbs. More like a ritual purification than ordinary cleaning." Miguel ran his fingers along the basin's edge, then peered inside. A faint discoloration at the bottom caught his attention, a circular stain that the priest's cleaning had not completely eliminated. "Elena, does the baptismal water come from a special source?" "The church has its own well in the courtyard. It's said to be one of the oldest in the village, dug by the first settlers." Miguel returned to the records, scanning backward through time. His methodical review revealed something he had suspected might exist, another cluster of infant deaths, decades earlier. "Look at this. From 1853 to 1855, the Ortiz family lost 3 infant sons, all within days of baptism." Elena crossed herself. "Madre de Dios!" Miguel continued searching, eventually finding a third pattern from 1812. The Mendoza family, again 3 male infants, all dead shortly after baptism. "This can't be coincidence," Miguel murmured, copying the dates into his notebook. The sound of a throat clearing startled them both. Father Dominguez stood in the doorway, his expression severe. "I see you've taken an interest in our parish history, Senor Torres." Miguel closed the ledger carefully. "Forgive the intrusion, Father. I was researching the village's past. By sneaking into my office during siesta?" The priest entered fully, his gaze shifting between Miguel and Elena. "I'm disappointed, Elena. You know better than to bring strangers into church offices without permission." "Father, Elena began, but Miguel interrupted. "The responsibility is mine entirely, Father. But now that we're speaking frankly, perhaps you can explain why you didn't mention that the Herrera tragedies have precedent in Los Ojos." Father Dominguez's expression remained impassive, but Miguel noticed his hands clasping tightly behind his back. "Every village has its share of tragedy, Senor Torres. Infant mortality was even more common in earlier times. 3 male infants in each family, all following baptism. That pattern suggests something beyond ordinary tragedy." The priest moved to the window, looking out at the dusty village square. For a long moment he remained silent, seeming to debate with himself. "What do you know of Los Ojos' founding?" he finally asked. "Only that it dates to the early Spanish colonial period," Miguel replied. "This village was established in 1680, following the Pueblo Revolt. The original settlers were 12 Spanish families fleeing northern settlements." The priest turned back to face them. "What few know is that the land they chose had significance to the native peoples, a place where waters emerged from deep within the earth." "The old well," Elena said softly. "Indeed. The settlers saw the natural spring as God's providence. They built their church around it, incorporating the sacred waters into Christian ritual through the baptismal font." Miguel sensed they were approaching something significant. "And the deaths?" Father Dominguez sighed heavily. "There are records, kept separately from the parish books, that suggest a pattern that emerges approximately every 40 years. 3 male infants from a single family bloodline, all dying mysteriously after baptism. Why hasn't anyone connected these events before? Miguel demanded. Because those who knew the full history either died or left Los Ojos afterward. Each time, the families affected departed, taking their knowledge with them. The church, he hesitated. The church has maintained certain records, but they are not shared with parishioners. And you've known about this pattern since the first Herrera boy died? Miguel couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. I suspected after the second death, the priest admitted. I requested access to the diocesan archives in Santa Fe, where the older records are kept. By the time my suspicions were confirmed, Isabella was already carrying Rodrigo. Yet you baptized him anyway, Elena said, her voice barely audible. Father Dominguez's face showed genuine anguish. I performed the sacrament with water brought from Santa Fe, not from the church well. I blessed it repeatedly. I took every precaution the church allows. But you didn't warn the Herreras, Miguel pressed. Warn them of what? An obscure pattern with no explanation? Would you have me tell grieving parents that their next son was doomed because of some curse our faith doesn't even recognize? The priest's composure finally cracked. I am a man of God, Señor Torres. I deal in salvation, not superstition. Miguel studied the priest carefully. The mark behind the ears, did the other historical victims have it too? Father Dominguez hesitated, then nodded once. And the mysterious visitor before Rodrigo's baptism. Who was he? I don't know his name. He spoke with Carlos briefly after Mass. I assumed he was a relative. Father, Elena interjected gently, you've been cleaning the baptismal font with unusual care. Why? The priest looked suddenly tired, the weight of his knowledge evident in his posture. Because after each Herrera baptism, I found the same thing in the morning, a perfect circle of discoloration at the bottom of the font, as if something had marked the blessed water. The implications hung in the air between them. Miguel's journalistic skepticism battled with the mounting evidence of something inexplicable. I need to speak with Carlos Herrera, Miguel decided, and Isabella, if possible. Father Dominguez nodded slowly. Carlos should be home by now. His brother-in-law Gabriel stays with them most afternoons. He moved to his desk, removing a small key from his pocket. There is one more record you should see before you go. He unlocked a drawer and withdrew an ancient leather folder, its surface cracked with age. Inside was a single yellow document written in formal Spanish, dating from 1680. The original land grant for Los Ojos, the priest explained. Read the final paragraph. Miguel leaned closer, translating the archaic Spanish carefully. Let it be known that these waters, granted to these faithful subjects of His Majesty for their settlement and baptism of their descendants, carry both blessing and obligation. The price of settlement has been negotiated and agreed upon. Every 40 years hence, the waters shall claim their due from the bloodline of the signatories, lest all perish from thirst. Below the text were 12 signatures, the founding families of Los Ojos. The last name on the list, written in a shaking hand, Herrera. The Herrera home stood apart from other village dwellings, larger and better maintained, suggesting the family once held considerable status in Los Ojos. As Miguel and Elena approached, they noticed a horse tethered outside, a fine Appaloosa that seemed out of place in the humble village. That's Gabriel Montoya's horse, Elena explained, Isabella's brother. He's been staying with them since Rodrigo's death. Miguel nodded, mentally preparing his approach. The conversation with Father Dominguez had shifted his understanding of the situation from mysterious deaths to something more complex and disturbing, something that blended history, obligation, and forces beyond simple explanation. Their knock was answered by a tall man with sharp features and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Gabriel Montoya appeared to be in his late 30s, dressed in the style of a prosperous rancher. His calculating gaze assessed Miguel immediately. "You must be the journalist from Santa Fe," he said without preamble. "Word travels quickly here." "Miguel Torres," Miguel confirmed, offering his hand. "I understand you're Isabella's brother." "And godfather to her sons," Gabriel replied, his grip firm but brief. He turned to Elena with a nod of familiarity before stepping aside. "Come in. Carlos is expecting you." The interior of the Herrera home reflected the family's declining fortunes. What had once been fine furnishings showed signs of neglect. Dust gathered in corners, and the air held the stale odor of a house whose windows remained perpetually closed. Carlos Herrera sat at a wooden table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him. He was a shadow of what must have once been an imposing man, his frame still large but slumped, his face bloated from drink and grief. He didn't rise when they entered. "So you're the one asking questions about my boys," he said, his voice hoarse. "Come to make a story of our misery?" "I've come seeking understanding," Miguel replied carefully, taking the seat Gabriel indicated across from Carlos. "I'm sorry for your losses," Carlos gave a bitter laugh. "Understanding? There's nothing to understand. God has cursed me. Or perhaps it was the Herreras who cursed themselves generations ago." Miguel noted Gabriel's sharp glance at his brother-in-law. "You're referring to the land grant of 1680? Surprise flickered across Carlos's face. "Father Dominguez has been talking too much." He poured himself another drink with an unsteady hand. "What do you know about it?" "Only what's written, that the waters claim a price every 40 years from the founding bloodlines." Gabriel interjected smoothly. "Old documents filled with the superstitious language of their time, Mr. Torres. Surely a modern journalist doesn't give credence to such things. 3 infant deaths following a historical pattern would make even the most skeptical person curious," Miguel countered, turning back to Carlos. "When did you first make the connection to the past deaths?" Carlos stared into his glass. "After Manuel died. My grandmother had told stories. I thought they were just tales to frighten children. But then I found old family papers in the attic, journals from my great-grandfather. He lost 3 sons the same way in the 1850s. "Why didn't you leave Los Ojos after the second death?" Elena asked softly. Carlos's expression darkened. "Where would we go? This land, this house, it's all we have, and Isabella was already expecting Rodrigo. We hoped," his voice broke. "We took precautions with Rodrigo's baptism," Gabriel added. "Father Dominguez used water from Santa Fe. I personally stood guard the entire night." "Yet Rodrigo still died," Miguel observed, "with the same mark behind his ear as his brothers." Carlos looked up sharply. "How do you know about the mark?" "Elena told me. I've also learned this same pattern happened to the Ortiz family in the 1850s and the Mendoza family in 1812. Carlos pushed away from the table abruptly. "What good does knowing do? My sons are still dead." "Knowledge might prevent future deaths," Miguel suggested. "The pattern repeats every 40 years, but why? And why always 3 sons from one bloodline?" "The land grant mentions an obligation," Elena added gently. "A negotiated price." Gabriel's expression hardened. "You're suggesting some sort of sacrifice? That's barbaric and blasphemous." "I'm not suggesting anything," Miguel clarified. "I'm trying to understand what happened to these children." Carlos slammed his glass down. "Understanding won't bring them back. Nothing will bring them back." His anger collapsed as quickly as it had flared, leaving him diminished. "Isabella hasn't spoken in weeks. She just stares at their empty cribs." "May I speak with her?" Miguel asked quietly. "She's resting," Gabriel answered before Carlos could respond. "The doctor prescribed laudanum for her nerves. She's not lucid most days." Miguel made a note of Gabriel's protective stance regarding his sister. "I understand a stranger visited you before Rodrigo's baptism. Who was he?" Carlos and Gabriel exchanged a glance that Miguel couldn't interpret. "A representative from the Santa Fe ring," Carlos finally said. "They've been trying to buy this land for years, water rights." "The Santa Fe ring," a notorious group of Anglo lawyers, businessmen and politicians, known for acquiring Spanish land grants through various means, legal and otherwise. Their involvement added yet another layer to the mystery. "What was his name?" Miguel pressed. "Blackwood," Carlos muttered. "Thomas Blackwood. Said he represented investors interested in the natural spring." As their conversation continued, Miguel became increasingly aware of movement on the floor above. Soft footsteps crossed back and forth, pausing occasionally near what must be a window overlooking the village. Carlos noticed Miguel's attention shift upward. "Isabella," he confirmed, his voice softening. "She spends most days watching the church." Has she said anything about what happened on the nights the boys died?" Miguel asked carefully. Carlos exchanged another meaningful glance with Gabriel before answering. "Only nonsense. Dreams about a tall man standing over the cribs, the sensation of being unable to move or scream. The doctor says it's the grief affecting her mind. Sleep paralysis is common during traumatic periods," Miguel acknowledged. "But you mentioned seeing something similar the night Rodrigo died?" Carlos reached for the bottle again, but Gabriel subtly moved it beyond his grasp. With a frustrated sigh, Carlos leaned back in his chair. "I'd been at the cantina, came home late, saw a tall figure leaving the nursery, thought it was Gabriel checking on the baby." Carlos's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "But Gabriel was still downstairs. When I reached the nursery, Rodrigo was already gone, not breathing, and there was that mark, just appearing behind his ear as I watched." "You saw the mark form?" Miguel couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Like a shadow rising under the skin," Carlos confirmed, his eyes distant with the memory. "Perfect circle. By the time the doctor arrived, it looked like a birthmark." A soft creak on the stairs drew everyone's attention. Isabella Herrera stood on the bottom step, her once beautiful face now gaunt, dark circles shadowing her eyes. Her long black hair hung loose around shoulders, draped in a black shawl. Though she couldn't have been more than 25, grief had aged her beyond her years. "Isabella," Carlos stood quickly, moving toward his wife. "You should be resting." She ignored him, her unnervingly steady gaze fixed on Miguel. When she spoke, her voice was rough from disuse, but surprisingly clear. "You've been to the cemetery. You've seen their graves." It wasn't a question. Miguel nodded respectfully. "Yes, Señora Herrera, I'm very sorry for your losses. Did you see how they're arranged? In a line pointing to the church?" She took another step into the room, waving off her brother's attempt to support her. "They're markers, signposts." Gabriel intervened smoothly. "Isabella, you're not well. The laudanum—" "I haven't touched the laudanum in days," she interrupted, her gaze never leaving Miguel. "My mind is clear now, clear enough to remember what we all agreed to forget." The room fell silent. Even Carlos seemed transfixed by his wife's sudden lucidity. "What did you remember, Señora Herrera?" Miguel asked gently. "The water." She moved to the table, her movements deliberate. "Los ojos" means the eyes in Spanish. Did you know that? The settlers named it for the natural springs, eyes looking up from the earth. A bitter smile crossed her lips. "But eyes look both ways. They see and they are seen." Gabriel placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. "Isabella, please." She shrugged him off with surprising force. "No more secrets, Gabriel. 3 sons is enough." Turning back to Miguel, she continued. "The baptismal font uses water from the oldest well, water that was here before the Spanish, before the church, water that remembers what was promised." Miguel leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. "What was promised, Señora Herrera?" "Blood rights," she said simply. "Every 40 years, 3 male children from one of the founding bloodlines. The pattern shifts from family to family, but the number remains constant. 3 sons." "Isabella, this is just folklore," Carlos interjected weakly, but his protest lacked conviction. "Is it?" she challenged, turning to her husband. "You saw the figure that night. You saw the mark form." Just as your great-grandfather described in his journal. Miguel made a mental note to ask about this journal. The land grant mentioned an obligation negotiated with the waters. Do you know what that means? Isabella's gaze drifted toward the window, where the church spire was visible against the afternoon sky. The first settlers found paradise here, fertile soil, abundant water in a territory of desert. The native peoples warned them the place was sacred, that the waters demanded respect, but the Spanish wanted the land. A deal was made, Miguel surmised, following her narrative. She nodded. A compromise. The settlers could stay, build their church, use the waters, but at a price. Every 40 years, the waters would claim 3 male children from the bloodlines, baptized in the sacred spring. That's human sacrifice, Eleanor whispered, horrified. The church would never condone such a thing. The church didn't know, Isabella replied, or chose not to see. The deaths always appeared natural, only the families understood the true cost. Gabriel's patience finally broke. This is absurd. You're suggesting our family participated in some pagan blood ritual disguised as Christian baptism? Not participated, Isabella corrected, her voice hollow. Submitted. There's a difference. The implications hung heavy in the room. Miguel struggled to reconcile his journalistic skepticism with the evidence before him. 3 documented cycles of infant deaths spanning nearly 2 centuries, all following the same pattern, all connected to a single water source. The stranger, Blackwood, Miguel said suddenly. What did he really want? Carlos looked uncomfortable. He knew about the pattern, offered to buy our land for a considerable sum, said his employers understood old arrangements and could ensure our future children would be safe. How could he guarantee that? Miguel pressed. He didn't say, but he knew things, details about the previous deaths that weren't in any public record. Carlos rubbed his face wearily. I refused him. 2 days later, Rodrigo was baptized. That night he died. A new thought struck Miguel. The mark behind the ear, did Blackwood mention it? Isabella answered before Carlos could. He called it the seal of the covenant, said it was proof the waters had accepted the offering. Miguel felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. Senora Herrera, you said the baptismal water remembers what was promised. What happens if the promise isn't kept? Her dark eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. The old stories say all the wells in Los Ojos would dry up, the land would turn to dust, everyone would perish, not just 3 sons. So the village sacrifices 3 infants every 40 years to ensure its survival, Miguel summarized, the horror of it settling in his stomach like lead. Not the village, Isabella corrected. 1 family, 1 bloodline each cycle. This time, it was ours. Her voice broke on the last word, the first crack in her composed facade. Carlos moved to his wife's side, gently taking her hand. We didn't know, Isabella, not until it was too late. But Father Dominguez suspected after the 2nd death, Miguel pointed out. Yet Rodrigo was still baptized in the church. Not with water from the well, Gabriel insisted. The priest brought water from Santa Fe. Isabella gave a hollow laugh. And you think that matters? The font itself is carved from stone taken from around the spring. The ritual is what matters, not just the water. She turned to Miguel with sudden intensity. You must tell our story. Make sure no other family suffers as we have. I intend to, Miguel assured her. But first, I need to see Carlos's great-grandfather's journal, and I need to understand what this Thomas Blackwood and the Santa Fe ring want with Los Ojos. Gabriel's expression darkened. Blackwood isn't just interested in water rights. He knows about the arrangement. Speaks of it like it's a business opportunity. How could this possibly benefit businessmen from Santa Fe? Elena asked. Carlos and Isabella exchanged a look before Carlos answered reluctantly. Blackwood said something about redirecting the obligation, that his employers had methods to ensure the water's demands could be met without affecting valuable bloodlines. The implication was clear and horrifying. The Santa Fe ring believed they could control the supernatural force behind the deaths, directing it away from certain families and presumably toward others. I need to find this Blackwood, Miguel decided. Where would he stay when visiting Los Ojos? There's no hotel here, Gabriel replied. Visitors typically stay in Albuquerque or at the stagecoach stop in Bernalillo. A sound from outside interrupted them, the approach of a horse at speed. Gabriel moved to the window, tension evident in his posture. "It's Dr. Winters," he reported, turning back with a troubled expression, "and he's not alone." "Doctor." Winters dismounted in front of the Herrera home, accompanied by a tall, elegantly dressed man, whose black suit and hat seemed impervious to the dust of the territorial roads. Even from a distance, the stranger carried an aura of authority that seemed out of place in the humble village. "Thomas Blackwood," Carlos muttered, moving away from the window. "What is he doing back here?" Miguel assessed the situation quickly. "I need to speak with him, but perhaps not with Dr. Winters present. The doctor seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned Blackwood earlier." Gabriel nodded in agreement. "I'll receive them. Carlos, take Isabella upstairs. Mr. Torres, perhaps you and Elena should wait in the kitchen for now." As they moved toward the back of the house, Isabella caught Miguel's sleeve. "Be careful," she whispered. "Blackwood knows more than he should about things no living person should understand." In the kitchen, Miguel positioned himself near the door, where he could overhear the conversation in the main room. Elena stood nervously by the back door, clearly uncomfortable with the deception, but equally unwilling to leave. Through the partial opening, Miguel observed Gabriel greeting the visitors with forced cordiality. Dr. Winters appeared agitated, his normally precise demeanor unsettled. Blackwood, by contrast, moved with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. He was older than Miguel had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with silver temples contrasting against otherwise dark hair. His eyes, visible when he removed his hat, were an unusual pale grey that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Mr. Montoya," Blackwood's voice carried a slight Eastern accent, refined and educated. "I apologize for the unexpected visit. Doctor, Winters mentioned you had a visitor from Santa Fe asking questions about your family's recent tragedies." Gabriel's posture remained rigidly formal. "News travels quickly in small communities, Mr. Blackwood, but I fail to see how my family's visitors concern you." "On the contrary," Blackwood smiled without warmth, "your family's well-being is precisely my concern. My employers maintain a vested interest in the prosperity of Los Ojos and its founding families. Your employers offered to buy our land after 3 children died," Gabriel countered. "That suggests interest in our property, not our well-being." Blackwood spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "A misunderstanding. We sought to offer your sister and her husband a fresh start elsewhere, away from painful memories." His gaze sharpened. "But now I understand a journalist is investigating these unfortunate deaths. Such attention rarely benefits communities like Los Ojos, where traditional arrangements have maintained harmony for generations." Dr. Winters shifted uncomfortably at this phrasing. Miguel noted the physician seemed more like a reluctant accomplice than a willing participant in Blackwood's agenda. "Mr. Torres is a distant cousin," Gabriel lied smoothly. "His interest is personal, not professional." "Indeed?" Blackwood's tone suggested he knew better. "Then why has he been examining parish records and speaking with Father Dominguez about historical patterns of infant mortality?" The room fell silent. Miguel tensed, realizing Blackwood had been tracking his movements through the village. "Los Ojos has existed in delicate balance for centuries, Mr. Montoya," Blackwood continued, his voice dropping to a near-hypnotic cadence. "My employers understand and respect such balances. They also possess means to redirect certain obligations away from families who have already contributed their share." Gabriel's response was ice-cold. "You speak of my nephew's deaths as contributions." I speak practically of matters most prefer to shroud in superstition and silence, Blackwood countered. The arrangement that sustains Los Ojos is neither good nor evil. It simply is, like gravity or the seasons. Dr. Winters finally spoke, his voice strained. Perhaps we should discuss this another time. The family is still in mourning. Blackwood ignored him, his attention fully on Gabriel. The cycle will begin again in 40 years, perhaps with your own descendants, Mr. Montoya. Unless, of course, arrangements are made beforehand. What arrangements? Gabriel demanded. You speak in riddles. The water rights to Los Ojos' spring have value beyond mere irrigation or drinking, Blackwood explained with the air of a professor addressing a slow student. Properly managed, the obligation can be directed toward more appropriate vessels. Miguel had heard enough. He stepped into the main room, Elena following reluctantly behind him. Mr. Blackwood, he announced himself. Miguel Torres, Santa Fe, New Mexican. I'd be interested to hear more about these appropriate vessels you mention. Blackwood turned, showing no surprise at Miguel's appearance. Ah, the journalist. I wondered when you'd reveal yourself. His smile remained fixed, but his pale eyes hardened. I'm afraid my business discussions with the Herrera and Montoya families are private matters. 3 dead children following a documented historical pattern seems less like a private business matter and more like a community concern, Miguel countered, meeting Blackwood's gaze steadily. Mr. Torres fancies himself an investigator of local folklore, Blackwood said to Gabriel, though his eyes remained on Miguel. An admirable academic pursuit, though hardly newsworthy. I've found mention of your employers, the Santa Fe Ring, in connection with similar patterns in other villages with natural springs, Miguel bluffed, watching for a reaction. Curiously, in those cases, deaths shifted from founding families to newer settlers after land changed hands. It was a shot in the dark, but Blackwood's momentary stillness suggested Miguel had struck closer to truth than he'd expected. You've been misinformed, Blackwood recovered smoothly, though I'd be interested to know which villages you believe demonstrate such patterns. Doctor. Winters interjected nervously, Mr. Blackwood, we should return to Albuquerque before dark. Shortly, Doctor. Blackwood dismissed him without looking away from Miguel. Mr. Torres and I should speak privately first. I believe we share common interests. I prefer witnesses to my conversations, Miguel replied evenly. A flash of irritation crossed Blackwood's face before his composed mask returned. As you wish. He retrieved a card from his pocket, extending it to Miguel. When you're ready for a substantive discussion about water rights in New Mexico territory and their historical implications, you can reach me at this address in Santa Fe. Miguel accepted the card, noting the embossed letterhead of a prominent law firm known to represent the Santa Fe Ring's interests. One question before you leave, Mr. Blackwood, Miguel said. Were you in Los Ojos the night Rodrigo Herrera died? For the first time, Blackwood's composure faltered slightly. I departed the morning after the baptism. The child was alive and well when I left. His gaze shifted toward the stairs. Please extend my condolences to Mr. and Mrs. Herrera. The loss of a child is beyond comprehension. As Blackwood turned to leave, Miguel added, Strange that you mentioned a seal of covenant to Mrs. Herrera, the same mark found behind each child's ear. How would a lawyer from Santa Fe know such a specific detail? Blackwood paused at the door, turning slowly. The affable mask had dropped entirely, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Mr. Torres, New Mexico territory balances precariously between old ways and new. Some arrangements predate American governance, Spanish colonization, even native settlements. His voice lowered. Disturbing these arrangements rarely ends well for the curious. Good day. After Blackwood and Dr. Winters departed, the room remained silent for several long moments. Gabriel finally broke the tension. He threatened you. Miguel nodded, examining the business card, while offering to include me in whatever scheme his employers are running. He looked up at Gabriel. The Santa Fe ring isn't known for supernatural interests. They typically focus on land grabs and political manipulation. What would they want with an obscure water rights arrangement linked to infant deaths? Power, came Isabella's voice from the stairway. She had been listening. Control over life and death is the ultimate power. Carlos appeared behind her, his expression haunted. Blackwood believes he can control whatever takes our children, direct it toward others, or sell protection from it, Miguel suggested grimly. Imagine the leverage. Pay us, or your sons might be next. Elena, who had remained silent during the confrontation, finally spoke. This is evil, beyond corruption or greed. Evil has always found willing servants, Isabella said softly, especially when disguised as business. Miguel tucked Blackwood's card into his notebook. I need to see that journal you mentioned, your great-grandfather's account of the previous deaths, and then I should speak with Father Dominguez again. He knows more than he's shared. Carlos nodded heavily. The journal is in the attic. I'll get it. As he turned to go upstairs, he added, Be careful, Torres. Blackwood isn't the kind of man who makes idle threats. Gabriel moved to the window, watching as Blackwood and Dr. Winters rode away. He'll return. Men like that always do. Miguel joined him at the window, noting how Blackwood paused near the church, examining the building with obvious interest before continuing toward the road out of town. Let him come, Miguel said with more confidence than he felt. Some stories need to be told, regardless of who wants them buried. The attic of the Herrera home was stifling in the late afternoon heat, dust particles dancing in the slanted light from small windows at either end. Carlos led Miguel through stacked furniture and trunks to a small wooden chest tucked under the eaves. My grandmother gave me this before she died, Carlos explained, kneeling beside the chest. Said it contained family history I might need someday. His bitter laugh held no humor. I should have opened it sooner. The chest contained various family documents, land deeds, marriage certificates, faded photographs. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Carlos handled it reverently. My great-grandfather's account of the deaths in the 1850s. I found it after Manuel died, when I was searching for explanations. He passed the journal to Miguel. It's in Spanish, but I assume you can read it. Miguel nodded, carefully opening the fragile binding. The handwriting was cramped but legible, the Spanish formal and old-fashioned. He began reading aloud, translating as he went. October 12th, 1853. Today we buried our firstborn son, Francisco. The physician claims it was natural causes, but my heart knows otherwise. The mark behind his ear appeared in the night after his baptism in the waters of Los Ojos. My mother finally told me the truth our family has concealed for generations, that every 40 years the waters claim 3 sons from one of the founding bloodlines. This time, it seems the Ortiz family has been chosen. Miguel flipped through several pages, scanning the entries until he found the account of the second death. June 3rd, 1854. God forgive me. I allowed Juanita to insist on baptizing our second son, believing the stories were mere superstition. Now Alejandro lies cold in the ground beside his brother, the same mark upon him. The priest knows something. I see it in his eyes when he offers condolences. He scrubs the baptismal font with unusual vigor, as if to wash away evidence of some contamination. Carlos pointed to an entry further along. Here, after the third death. Miguel read the passage. November 17th, 1855. Miguel, our third son, has joined his brothers. I can no longer deny the truth. What the Spanish settlers did when they claimed this land, the bargain they made with forces they did not understand, has cost my family everything. We will leave Los Ojos tomorrow, abandoning the land my ancestors died to claim. Better to be landless than to sacrifice more children to the waters beneath the church. But tonight, I witnessed something I must record. As I kept vigil over Miguel's body, A visitor came, a tall man in formal attire who introduced himself as representing interested parties from Santa Fe. He spoke of the arrangement as if discussing a business contract, offered to purchase our land for a generous sum. When I demanded to know his interest in our tragedy, he said only that certain obligations could be redirected if managed properly. I threw him out, but his parting words haunt me. The pattern will continue, with or without your participation. Better to profit from the inevitable than merely suffer it. Miguel looked up from the journal, meeting Carlos's gaze. Blackwood, or someone like him, approached your family before. Carlos nodded grimly. The Santa Fe ring has existed in some form since the American occupation began. It seems they've known about Los Ojos' secret for generations. Miguel continued reading, finding a final entry dated several months later. April 2nd, 1856. From our new home in Las Cruces, I write this final entry. News has reached us that the church in Los Ojos partially collapsed last month, damaging the baptismal font. 3 children from the village died when a sudden sickness swept through. None of them from founding families, all of them recently baptized in water from a new well dug after we departed. The waters have found new vessels for their thirst. I pray for those children and their families. I pray for forgiveness for my ancestors who made this unholy bargain. But most of all, I pray that in 40 years, when the cycle returns, no one will rebuild the old baptismal font or draw water from the original spring. Let Los Ojos' dark covenant die with this generation. The attic fell silent as Miguel closed the journal. Through the small window, he could see the church spire rising above the village, golden in the late afternoon light. Your great-grandfather believed moving away would end the cycle for your family, Miguel observed. Yet here we are, 3 generations later, with 3 more sons in the ground, Carlos replied heavily. We returned to Los Ojos when my father inherited this house. No one remembered or spoke of the old stories. Miguel carefully rewrapped the journal. This account confirms something important. When the original arrangement was disrupted, the deaths shifted to other children. But still 3 deaths, Carlos noted. Always 3. The Santa Fe ring must believe they can control this pattern, Miguel reasoned. Direct it toward specific families or away from others. Carlos's expression darkened. Using the deaths of children as a weapon or a commodity. It's monstrous. Yet it explains their interest in water rights throughout the territory, Miguel replied, thinking aloud. If similar arrangements exist in other old Spanish settlements... A call from below interrupted them, Gabriel's voice urgent and strained. Carlos! Torres! Come quickly! They descended to find Gabriel and Elena in the main room, both looking troubled. Elena held a folded note. Father Dominguez sent this, she explained, handing it to Miguel. His housekeeper just delivered it. The note was brief and direct. Mr. Torres, I have discovered something in the church records that changes my understanding of Los Ojos' history. Please come to the church tonight after Vespers. I will show you evidence that the pattern can be broken, but I fear interference. Tell no one else. Father Dominguez. Miguel passed the note to Carlos after reading it. It seems the priest has found something new. Or it's a trap, Gabriel suggested darkly. Blackwood could have pressured him. Father Dominguez seemed genuinely troubled by the deaths, Miguel countered. I believe he wants to end this cycle as much as anyone. Carlos rubbed his face wearily. What will you do? Miguel considered the question carefully. His journalistic instincts pushed him to pursue the lead, but caution suggested bringing allies. I'll meet him as requested, he decided, but not alone. Gabriel, would you accompany me? Your knowledge of the village and its people would be valuable. Gabriel nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. And Carlos should stay with Isabella? I don't trust Blackwood to simply leave after being confronted. I'll stay as well, Elena offered. Isabella shouldn't be alone with only men at a time like this. So as they discussed arrangements for the evening meeting, Miguel found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the window where the church stood as it had for centuries, a monument to faith built atop something far older and perhaps far darker than its creators had understood. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting Los Ojos in lengthening shadows. Soon it would be Vespers time, when Father Dominguez would ring the church bell, calling the faithful to evening prayers. And afterward, Miguel hoped, they would finally learn how to break the cycle that had claimed 9 sons across 3 generations of Los Ojos families. What none of them noticed was the figure watching the Herrera home from the shadows of a nearby alley, Dr. Winters, his expression troubled as he observed the house where the territory's most persistent journalist was unraveling a secret that had remained buried for generations. Dusk settled over Los Ojos as Miguel and Gabriel approached the church. The Vespers bell had rung 30 minutes earlier, and the few parishioners who had attended the brief service were already dispersing to their homes. The church stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with lamplight from within. "Father Dominguez keeps the side door unlocked after services," Gabriel explained, leading Miguel around the building. "He says a house of God should remain accessible to those in need." The side entrance opened to a small vestibule connected to the main sanctuary. As they entered, Miguel noted the unusual silence, no sounds of movement or prayer despite the lamps being lit. "Father Dominguez?" Gabriel called, his voice echoing slightly in the empty church. No answer came. The main sanctuary appeared vacant, though candles burned near the altar and in wall sconces, casting shifting shadows across the ancient adobe walls. "Perhaps he's in his office," Miguel suggested, moving toward the sacristy. They found the priest's office empty as well, though signs of recent activity were evident. An open book on the desk, a half-empty cup of coffee still warm to Miguel's touch. "He was here recently," Miguel observed, examining the book. It was an ancient parish record, much older than those he had seen before, its pages brittle with age. The text was in Latin rather than Spanish, with occasional margin notes in a different hand. "Look at this," Miguel said, pointing to a passage where the margin notes seemed agitated, the handwriting larger and more hurried than elsewhere. The Latin was ecclesiastical, but Miguel could translate enough to understand the gist, a priest's account of challenging the aquae pactum, the water pact, and the consequences that followed. "Can you read Latin?" Gabriel asked, peering over Miguel's shoulder. "Enough to get the meaning," Miguel replied, scanning further down the page. "This appears to be an account from the 1770s. A priest named Father Acosta discovered the pattern of deaths and attempted to stop it by destroying the original baptismal font. What happened? According to this, the font cracked but didn't break entirely. The next 3 baptisms still resulted in deaths, but the children died differently, not in their sleep, but from a wasting disease that took weeks." Miguel turned the page, finding more urgent notes. Acosta believed the arrangement could be broken completely, but only by understanding its true nature. "And what was that nature?" Gabriel pressed. Before Miguel could answer, a sound from below them, beneath the church floor, caught their attention. A dull thud, followed by what might have been a voice. "There's something under the church," Miguel said, closing the book carefully. Gabriel nodded. "The old crypt. It predates the current building. The entrance is behind the altar." They moved quickly back to the main sanctuary. Behind the altar, partially hidden by a tapestry, a narrow wooden door stood slightly ajar. "It's usually locked," Gabriel whispered, tension evident in his voice. Miguel retrieved a lamp from a nearby stand. "Father Dominguez must be down there." The stairway beyond the door descended steeply into darkness, the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they descended, carrying the earthy scent of old stone and still water. The crypt itself was larger than Miguel had expected, a series of connected chambers hewn from the bedrock beneath the church. The first room contained old funerary monuments and markers from the original settlement, some bearing the names of Los Ojos' founding families, A Herrera stone from 1693 bore the simple epitaph, "He kept faith with both worlds." Moving deeper into the crypt, they heard voices, or perhaps a single voice, echoing from the furthest chamber. Miguel raised the lamp higher, casting its light ahead of them as they approached cautiously. The innermost chamber opened into a circular space, dominated by a natural feature that made Miguel pause in astonishment. From the floor rose a small, perfectly circular pool of water, a natural spring bubbling up through the bedrock. Around its edge, carved symbols mixed Christian crosses with older, unfamiliar designs. The water itself seemed unusually clear and still, despite its constant renewal from below. Kneeling beside this pool was Father Dominguez, his back to them, apparently deep in prayer or conversation. As they entered, Miguel could hear him speaking rapidly in a mixture of Spanish and Latin. "Father," Gabriel called softly. The priest turned sharply, his expression transforming from surprise to relief when he recognized them. "You came. Good. There isn't much time." Father Dominguez looked haggard, his clerical collar loosened and his normally neat hair disheveled. Before him on the stone floor lay open several ancient documents and what appeared to be a map. "Mr. Torres, I've found it. The truth behind Los Ojos' curse." He gestured for them to join him near the pool. "This is the original spring that gave our village its name. The baptismal font above was deliberately positioned over this spot, connected by a shaft that draws water directly from this source." Miguel knelt to examine the pool more closely. "The original agreement was made here." "Not an agreement," Father Dominguez corrected urgently. "That's what I've discovered. The founding families never willingly sacrificed their children." He picked up one of the documents, a faded letter written in an elegant hand. "This is correspondence between Father Marcos, the first priest of Los Ojos, and his superior in Mexico City. He describes finding this chamber and the spring, already encircled with ancient symbols." "Native markings?" Miguel asked. "Older," the priest replied, his voice dropping. "Much older. The native peoples avoided this place, called it the Thirsty Mouth." He set down the letter, picking up another document. "Father Marcos believed building the church here would sanctify the location. He created the baptismal font as a way to claim the waters for Christ. But something went wrong," Gabriel surmised. Father Dominguez nodded grimly. "The first 3 baptisms resulted in deaths, all male infants from the Mendoza family. Rather than abandoning the site, Father Marcos convinced himself that a spiritual battle was underway, one that required continued use of the font to eventually purify the waters. So the pattern began," Miguel said softly, pieces falling into place. "Not as a deliberate arrangement, but as a consequence of building a church atop something older." "Precisely." Father Dominguez pointed to markings around the pool's edge. "These symbols predate known native settlements in this region. They appear to be a warning, not an invitation to bargain." Miguel studied the carvings, noting how they formed a continuous circle around the water's edge. "You said you found evidence the pattern could be broken?" The priest's expression grew more intense. "The cycle persists because the connection between this pool and the baptismal font remains intact. Father Acosta attempted to break the font itself, but the shaft connecting them remained. I believe—" A noise from the crypt entrance interrupted him, footsteps descending the stairs. Father Dominguez quickly gathered his documents. "Someone's coming. We must hurry." He thrust the papers into Miguel's hands. "Take these. If something happens to me, you must publish what you've learned. The connection must be severed completely." Before Miguel could respond, voices echoed through the crypt, one unmistakably Blackwood's, the other Dr. Winter's. They were arguing, their words becoming clearer as they approached. "Told you to ensure the journalist left Los Ojos," Blackwood was saying, his tone sharp with anger. "Instead, you've allowed him to uncover everything." "I'm a doctor, not your agent," Winters protested weakly. "I can't control who the Herreras speak with." Your position in this village exists at our discretion, Doctor. Remember that. Gabriel moved protectively in front of Miguel and the priest, positioning himself to face the entrance to the chamber. Miguel quickly tucked the documents inside his jacket, then retrieved his camera from his bag. If confrontation was inevitable, documentation might be their best protection. Blackwood appeared first in the doorway, his tall figure momentarily blocking the light behind him. His expression registered surprise at finding 3 men rather than 1, quickly masking it with his practiced composure. "Father Dominguez," he greeted the priest with forced cordiality, "I see you've brought company to your historical research." Doctor Winters appeared behind him, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he recognized Miguel and Gabriel. "Mr. Blackwood," Father Dominguez acknowledged stiffly, "the crypt is not generally open to visitors." "Yet here we all are," Blackwood replied smoothly, stepping into the chamber. His gaze traveled from the gathered men to the pool at the center, his eyes reflecting something like hunger when they rested on the water. "I see you've discovered the source." "The source of Los Ojos' tragedy," Miguel interjected. "Not a covenant or business arrangement, but a mistake built upon ignorance and fear." Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. "A romantic interpretation, Mr. Torres. The reality is more pragmatic." He moved further into the chamber, Dr. Winters following reluctantly behind. "What we have here is a natural phenomenon with predictable, manageable outcomes." "Predictable?" Gabriel's voice sharpened. "You speak of children dying as if discussing crop yields." "All power requires sacrifice, Mr. Montoya," Blackwood replied coolly. "The question is merely who pays the price and who reaps the benefit." Father Dominguez stepped forward, his earlier uncertainty replaced by righteous anger. "This pool was never meant to be used as it has been. The original markings are warnings, not instructions for sacrifice." "Warnings the first settlers chose to ignore," Blackwood acknowledged with a dismissive gesture. "Their error created an opportunity that has served various interests for generations." "Your interests," Miguel stated flatly. "The Santa Fe ring has known about this place, about the pattern of deaths. You've used it somehow." A cold smile played at Blackwood's lips. "My employers understand that certain anomalies exist throughout this territory. Places where the boundary between worlds grew thin long before humans arrived." He glanced at the pool. "This spring connects to waters far deeper than mere aquifers, Mr. Torres. Waters with appetites and memories." Miguel raised his camera, capturing Blackwood's image in the lamplight. The flash powder illuminated the chamber briefly, casting stark shadows across the ancient walls. Blackwood barely flinched. "Document all you wish," he said with confidence. "No newspaper would publish such fantastical claims without proof." "The deaths are proof," Miguel countered. 3 cycles across nearly 2 centuries, all following the same pattern. And now we know the Santa Fe ring has been exploiting this tragedy. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Exploiting?" "We've maintained the balance. When settlers built atop this place, they unleashed something they couldn't control. My predecessors brought order to chaos. By directing the deaths toward certain families," Father Dominguez asked, horror evident in his voice. "By ensuring the obligation remains contained and predictable," Blackwood corrected. 3 male infants every 40 years, a small price for the prosperity this region enjoys. "A small price for someone else's children," Gabriel spat. Blackwood ignored him, focusing on Miguel. "Consider the implications of your investigation, Mr. Torres. If you expose this place, what happens to Los Ojos, to the families who have lived here for generations? Do you think destroying the connection will end the deaths, or merely redirect them?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its implications. Miguel glanced at Father Dominguez, who clutched a crucifix at his chest, his expression troubled. "The pattern can be broken," the priest insisted, though with less certainty than before. "The connection severed permanently." "Can it?" Blackwood challenged. "Are you certain enough to risk the consequences? My employers have studied this phenomenon for generations." We've documented similar sites throughout the territory, places where the Spanish built churches atop springs or wells already marked with ancient warnings. How many? Miguel demanded, his journalist's mind racing with implications. How many villages have patterns like Los Ojos? Enough to make tampering with any single site extremely unwise, Blackwood replied. These waters are connected, Mr. Torres. Disturb one, and the others respond. Dr. Winters finally spoke, his voice strained. It's true, I've practiced in 3 different villages with similar patterns. When attempts were made to stop the cycle in one location, deaths accelerated in others. Miguel struggled to reconcile his rational mind with what he was hearing. You're claiming some sort of supernatural network connecting multiple springs throughout New Mexico? I claim nothing supernatural, Blackwood corrected, merely natural phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. The natives who first settled this region understood these waters were different. They marked them with warnings, kept their distance. The Spanish, in their religious fervor, believed they could sanctify what they didn't understand. Father Dominguez moved closer to the pool, his gaze fixed on its placid surface. If what you say is true, then Los Ojos has been built on suffering from the beginning, as has much of human civilization, Blackwood replied without emotion. The difference here is simply that the cost is more transparent. Miguel sensed they were approaching the heart of Blackwood's purpose. What does the Santa Fe ring want with Los Ojos now? You've made multiple offers to purchase the Herrera property. Water rights throughout the territory are increasingly valuable, Blackwood explained, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Those who control water control development. My employers simply seek to consolidate management of certain special water sources. To control who lives and who dies, Gabriel translated bitterly. Blackwood shrugged. To ensure the inevitable occurs in ways that serve larger interests rather than random chance. The hunger of these waters cannot be eliminated, Mr. Montoya. It can only be directed. A sudden ripple disturbed the surface of the pool, though no one had touched it. All 5 men instinctively stepped back as the water moved against natural physics, forming a perfect circular pattern that expanded outward. It senses our presence, Father Dominguez whispered, crossing himself. It acknowledges our discussion, Blackwood corrected, an unsettling reverence entering his voice. 3 centuries of baptisms have taught it to recognize human intent. Miguel felt a profound unease watching the unnatural movement of the water. The rational explanations he had sought throughout his investigation seemed increasingly inadequate in the face of what he was witnessing. What happens if the connection to the baptismal font is destroyed? He asked, addressing both Father Dominguez and Blackwood. The priest spoke first. According to Father Acosta's records, the pattern might be broken entirely. The waters would seek no more sacrifices. Or, Blackwood countered immediately, the waters find new paths to the surface, new vessels for their hunger. The deaths continue but become unpredictable, potentially more numerous, Dr. Winters nodded reluctantly. In medical terms, it's like treating symptoms while ignoring the underlying disease. The manifestations may change, but the condition persists. Gabriel looked between them in growing frustration. So we do nothing? Allow 3 more infants to die 40 years from now? Not nothing, Blackwood offered smoothly. My employers propose a managed solution. We acquire the water rights, implement certain procedures that channel the obligation toward appropriate subjects. Meaning what? Miguel demanded. Orphans? The poor? Those with no one to notice or care about their deaths? Blackwood's expression remained impassive. I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details. Father Dominguez turned from the pool, his face ashen. This is abomination, using death as a commodity. It is pragmatism, Father, Blackwood replied coldly. The deaths will occur regardless. Better they serve some purpose. Miguel had heard enough. He raised his camera again, capturing another image of Blackwood near the pool. I'm publishing everything. The historical pattern, The Santa Fe ring's involvement, your plans to weaponize these deaths for profit. Instead of anger, Blackwood's face showed something like pity. No reputable newspaper would print such allegations without evidence beyond a grieving family's testimony and an old journal. Then I'll find the other villages with similar patterns, Miguel countered. Document every case. Build evidence no editor could ignore. Blackwood's composure finally cracked, revealing a flash of genuine concern. That would be extraordinarily unwise, Mr. Torres. My employers have maintained discretion for generations. They will not tolerate exposure. The threat hung in the air between them. Dr. Winters looked increasingly uncomfortable, edging toward the chamber's entrance. Gabriel moved to stand beside Miguel. You forget, Blackwood, this is still our village. Our families have lived with this burden for generations. We decide what happens next, not you. A tense silence filled the chamber, broken only by the soft, continuous bubbling of the spring. Blackwood assessed the three men arrayed against him, calculation evident in his pale eyes. Consider carefully, he finally said. Exposing this situation won't bring back the Herrera boys. It won't prevent future deaths. It will only spread fear and destabilize arrangements that have maintained order for centuries. Arrangements that have benefited the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, Miguel countered. That ends now. Father Dominguez stepped forward. I believe I can break the connection between this pool and the baptismal font. End the cycle permanently. At what risk? Blackwood challenged. Are you willing to gamble with the lives of every child in Los Ojos, in the surrounding villages? The priest hesitated, the weight of responsibility evident in his expression. Miguel made a decision. We need more information before acting. I'm taking these documents to Santa Fe, consulting with experts who have no stake in maintaining your arrangements, Mr. Blackwood. A reasonable approach, Blackwood conceded, though his tone suggested otherwise. Though I wonder if you'll make it to Santa Fe with those documents. Before anyone could respond to the implied threat, a new voice echoed from the entrance to the chamber. That's enough, Blackwood. All heads turned to see Carlos Herrera standing in the doorway, a revolver steady in his hand. Behind him stood Isabella, her face set in grim determination. Carlos, Gabriel said in surprise, you were supposed to stay at the house. Isabella had a vision, Carlos replied, his gaze never leaving Blackwood. She saw this man at the spring attempting to renew what he calls an arrangement. Isabella moved into the chamber, her dark eyes fixed on the pool. 3 sons I have given to these waters. 3 lives cut short before they could begin. Her voice, though quiet, carried an intensity that filled the space. No more. No other mother will endure what I have suffered. Blackwood regarded the gun with surprising calm. Mrs. Herrera, your grief is understandable, but rash action will only bring more suffering. We heard everything, Carlos stated flatly. Your plans to continue using our tragedy for profit, to direct deaths toward those you deem expendable. You misunderstood, Blackwood began, but Isabella interrupted. I understand perfectly. I have seen you in my dreams for years. The tall man in black who stands over cradles while mothers cannot move or scream. She stepped closer to the pool. You are not just Blackwood. You have been many men over many generations. Different faces, same purpose. Something shifted in Blackwood's expression, a flicker of recognition or perhaps alarm. Mrs. Herrera, you're overwrought. These fantasies are not fantasies, she finished for him. From her pocket, she withdrew a small object that caught the lamplight, a silver pendant on a chain. I found this hidden in the wall of our nursery after Rodrigo died. It bears the same markings as those around the pool. Miguel moved closer to examine the pendant. Indeed, the circular design matched the carvings around the spring, a complex pattern of lines and symbols that seemed to vibrate slightly when viewed directly. Where did you get that? Blackwood demanded, his composure finally breaking completely. Isabella ignored him, addressing Father Dominguez instead. You were right about breaking the connection, Father. but wrong about how. She dangled the pendant over the pool. This has maintained the link between the waters and the font, a channel created deliberately, not by accident. Blackwood lunged forward suddenly, reaching for the pendant, but Carlos stepped between them, the revolver unwavering. "Stay back," Carlos warned. "Doctor." Winters took advantage of the distraction to slip from the chamber entirely, his footsteps hastily ascending the stairs. Isabella looked at Miguel. "You came seeking truth, Mr. Torres. Here it is. There was never a curse on Los Ojos. There was a weapon created by men who understood forces they had no right to control, passed down through generations of others willing to use it for power and profit." She turned to Blackwood. "Men like you." Blackwood's aristocratic facade had fallen away entirely, revealing something older and colder beneath. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, woman. These waters have flowed since before humans walked this land. They remember, they hunger. The pendant doesn't create their appetite, it merely directs it. Then let it hunger elsewhere." Isabella replied with quiet finality. "Not through my family. Not through any family." Before anyone could stop her, she dropped the pendant into the center of the pool. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The water surged upward in a column, defying gravity and natural law. A sound filled the chamber, not quite a voice, not quite a scream, but something between that vibrated through bone and blood. "What have you done?" Blackwood cried, genuine fear breaking through his controlled exterior. The water column collapsed back into the pool with unnatural suddenness, and for a moment perfect stillness reigned. Then a tremor ran through the ground beneath their feet, subtle at first, then increasingly violent. "We need to leave," Gabriel shouted over the growing rumble. "Now!" Father Dominguez gathered his remaining papers, while Carlos kept his revolver trained on Blackwood, who stood transfixed by the pool, his expression a mixture of rage and fascination. "Blackwood, come on!" Miguel called, surprising himself with his concern for the man who had threatened him minutes before. The tremors intensified. Dust and small stones began falling from the crypt ceiling. Blackwood finally tore his gaze from the pool, fixing Miguel with a look of cold certainty. "This isn't over, Torres. The waters will find new channels, new vessels." He backed toward another passage leading deeper into the crypt. "Tell your story if you must. By the time anyone believes it, the new arrangement will already be in place." "Adieu!" With those words, he disappeared into the darkness of the passage, just as larger stones began falling from above. "We can't follow him!" Father Dominguez shouted. "That passage is unstable!" The 5 remaining people rushed toward the exit stairs, climbing as the tremors threatened to throw them off balance. Behind them, the sound of crumbling stone and rushing water suggested the chamber with the pool was collapsing in on itself. They emerged into the main church to find candles toppled and sacred objects fallen from their places. The tremors were less violent here, but the building still groaned around them. "Outside!" Gabriel directed, helping Father Dominguez, who had stumbled on the uneven floor. They burst through the church doors into the night air of Los Ojos, where villagers had emerged from their homes, alarmed by the tremors. As they watched, a section of the church floor behind them collapsed with a thunderous roar, and water began seeping from the foundation, not gushing as from a broken pipe, but slowly spreading like a deliberate stain. "Doctor." Winters stood among the gathered villagers, his face pale in the moonlight as he watched Miguel and the others emerge from the damaged church. "Where's Blackwood?" he asked, voice shaking. "Gone," Miguel replied simply. "Possibly buried in the crypt." The doctor closed his eyes briefly. "Then it's over." "No," Isabella said with quiet certainty. "It's only beginning, but differently now. On our terms, not theirs." As the villagers gathered around the damaged church, Miguel found himself pulled between journalistic duty and human compassion. The story he had uncovered was beyond anything he had imagined when responding to Elena's letter. A tale spanning centuries, blending colonial history, indigenous warnings, supernatural elements, and modern corruption. 3 days later, Miguel sat at his desk in Santa Fe, staring at the blank page in his typewriter. The documents from Father Dominguez lay spread before him, along with his own extensive notes and photographs. He had promised the people of Los Ojos he would tell their story, expose the truth behind generations of tragedy. But how to tell a truth so strange it strained credibility? How to honor the suffering of the Herrera family while warning others about the forces still at work beneath the surface of New Mexico territory? The last report from Los Ojos had come yesterday via telegram from Elena. The church remained partially collapsed, the original baptismal font destroyed completely. The spring beneath had seemingly disappeared, the ground dry where water had flowed for centuries. Blackwood's body had not been found despite careful searching of the accessible portions of the crypt. And most significantly, water levels in wells throughout the region had risen overnight, including some that had been dry for years. As if something long contained had finally been released to flow naturally once more. Miguel inserted a fresh sheet of paper into his typewriter and began to write. The Herrera boys, each baptism night, ended in a silent funeral. His editor would question the story. Readers might doubt its veracity. The Santa Fe ring would certainly attempt to suppress it. But the truth demanded telling, especially when it had been buried for so long beneath the waters of Los Ojos. In the quiet of his office, as words began flowing onto the page, Miguel couldn't shake the memory of Blackwood's final warning. The waters will find new channels, new vessels. He typed faster, racing against forces he still didn't fully understand, but now respected with appropriate fear. Some stories needed to be told quickly before those who preferred them buried could regroup and restore their broken arrangements. Beyond his window, rain began falling on Santa Fe, the first substantial precipitation in months. Miguel paused his typing long enough to close the window, noting how the raindrops seemed to gather in perfect circles on the glass before sliding downward. Circles like the mark behind the ears of the Herrera boys, like the pendant Isabella had dropped into the pool, like the ripples spreading outward from a stone cast into waters far deeper than they appeared. He returned to his typewriter with renewed urgency. The story of Los Ojos needed to be told before the waters found their new channels, before the next cycle began.